Okay. Hello, everyone. How are you? Good? Yes. I mean, it's just us, so it's a small room, so it's okay if you can talk to me directly. Welcome and thank you for coming so early this morning to Pop-Kultur. I'm really happy to be here. The title of my talk, it's a workshop, so it's really more of a lecture, but hopefully a conversation. Is Robots, Virtual Reality, and the Impact of Emergent Technological Developments on the Pop Music Industry, which is such a big title and so many words. But really what I'm going to do is really talk about some ideas that I've been thinking about in relationship to technology around the development of robotics and the way that I think robotics are going to impact the popular music industry over the next 10 to 15 years or so, or even more. And then also talk a little bit about virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality and the way that those new technologies are also promising to impact music. So a lot of this is speculative as opposed to actual because we're waiting to see how some of these technologies might actually impact the music industry. But I was asked to come this morning and to basically provide a kind of overview of some of this stuff in the context of Pop-Kultur, and so I'm really happy to be able to do that. Just up front, since we're taping, I want to thank Katja Luker, I want to thank everybody at the music board, Christian, Birgit, Anya, for allowing me to be here and to come and speak. For those of you who don't know who's speaking to you right now, my name is Jason King. I am the Director of Global Studies and also the Director of Writing History and Emergent Media Studies at New York University. So there was a question earlier about whether I came just for this, and I wish I could say yes, I came just only for this one speaking event. I flew all the way from New York to do it, which if you'd like to believe that, you're more than welcome to. That sounds like a good story. But the reality is I was already in Berlin here to set up the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, which is the program that I teach at in New York, here to set up a version of it in Berlin, which actually launched on Friday, and first classes were this week for students. We've got at least one of our students here in the audience. Thank you for coming. Just a little bit of background so you know who is speaking to you today. New York University, the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music at New York University is an undergraduate program that trains students in the art and the business of creating and selling recorded music. It started in 2003. I was the founding faculty member. I worked directly with Clive Davis, the music mogul, to launch the program. And the idea of the program was a little different than most other music business programs or music industry programs at that time in 2003, so we're talking almost 13 years ago at this point. The idea was to train students holistically in all of the different aspects. So record producers or aspiring record producers had to learn business. Aspiring business people had to learn how to be in a recording studio. Aspiring music journalists had to learn how to write songs and be in a recording studio. Everybody learns everything, as opposed to a kind of traditional way that the music business works where everybody's in silos and not everybody knows everything, and only I think 5% of music executives who work at record labels actually have ever played an instrument, which is a very startling statistic and also explains a lot sometimes about the nature of at least the American music industry. Every artist coming through the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, because every student there is getting a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in recorded music. Every student is responsible for launching their own customized music business venture. So a record label, a music management company, there might be a performer, launching themselves as performers in terms of a brand or in terms of their own identity. And at the end of the 4 years, every student has to do what's called a capstone project, where they pitch their project to a group of invited industry leaders, and they can ask for funding or mentorship or anything that they would like to do at that time. So that was a very different model for our music program for artists that marries art and business and then also technology as well. And now there are other programs since that have started that are doing some kinds of similar things, but I'd like to think that we're kind of ahead of our time. In my capacity there as interim chair and artistic director for many years, I taught a number of different types of courses, including writing and journalism courses, but also helping spearhead and develop our technology area, and that's some of the stuff I'm going to be talking to you about today. So I've taught classes in things like music recommendation and discovery. Recently taught a class in immersive experiences, looking at VR, AR, and mixed reality. Taught a class called Conversations with Technology Entrepreneurs, where individuals who've built apps for people like Bjork and Radiohead came in to talk with students about how they can do those kinds of things themselves. And other kinds of courses as well in technology. So I hold a Ph.D. from NYU itself. I've been a music journalist as well for 16 years, writing for Vibe, Village Voice, New York Times, LA Times, Blender, and an author. I've produced events and concerts, musical director, management and consulting for record labels, but also for technology companies like Spotify and Buzz FM and other kinds of startups. And I also write for Vice magazine doing technology. So I give you that big long bio just as a kind of explanation of why I'm talking to you and what I'm going to be talking to you about. And the program here in Berlin for NYU is called the Clive Davis Institute X Berlin. And basically, students are studying what's called future pop music studies. So looking at and pushing forward questions of the future in popular music. So what is the future of the music business? What's the future of music producing in this era when record sales are clearly down? What does it mean to go into a recording studio and to produce an MP3 or album, right? Is that even the goal anymore? Or is it really live performance? And then how does that shift the way that we need to think about the recording studio? Same thing in terms of technology is a class called the Berlin Music Tech Startup Scene, which students meet with leading figures in the music tech scene here. And we just thought this, or I thought this would be a great place for students to think about those questions, given the history of the avant-garde and experimental work in Berlin. So that's why I'm here, but also, of course, to come here and talk at Pop-Kultur. So very happy to be doing that. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about emergent technologies, in particular robots, and then also immersive technologies like VR and AR. And again, it's going to be speculative, looking at their potential impact on the future of the music industry. It is billed as a workshop, but as I mentioned before, I'm doing it as a kind of lecture. So these are things we could be thinking about as one develops a career or shifts a career, ways of incorporating technology into what one already does. And I'm sure many folks out there are already in technology, so jump in at the end, because I'll do a Q&A and hope to be able to answer your questions. Okay, so I wanted to start with a quote from Mr. Brian Eno. That's a little bit off center there, no worries. So this is Brian Eno talking to Paul Morley in The Observer in 2010, so now 6 years ago. He said something that I thought was really fascinating, which is, and I'll give you the whole quote. He says, "I think records were just a little bubble through time, and those who made a living through records were for a while lucky. There is no reason why anyone should have made so much money from selling records, except that everything was right for this period of time. I always knew this period of time would run out sooner or later. It couldn't last, and now it's running out. I don't particularly care that it is, and I like the way that things are going. The record age was just a blip. It's a bit like if you had a source of whale blubber in the 1840s, and it could be used as fuel." Does everybody know whale blubber? So the fat from like a whale, okay, just making sure, right? It translates. "Before gas came along, if you traded in whale blubber, you were the richest man on earth. Then gas came along, and you'd be stuck with your whale blubber. Sorry, mate, history is moving along. Recorded music equals whale blubber. Eventually, something will replace it." Right? So, of course, when he said this, and he said it in a major newspaper, The Observer, so this was a very significant pronouncement, particularly because Brian Eno, for all the work that he's done, he's really been one of the sort of leading philosophers about recorded music itself and about the nature of record producing. As early as the 1970s, he was really starting to philosophize about ambient music and record producing and so on. So for someone of his stature to come and say, "Oh, by the way, this period that I did some of my best work in and that I excelled in is over, and thank you very much. If you are working in recorded music, recorded popular music, you are basically like the person who was selling whale blubber in the 19th century." That was a very shocking statement for a lot of people. And maybe his nonchalance and his kind of laissez-faire, about recorded music, like, I don't really care, could be due to the fact that he's produced all these U2 and Coldplay albums and he has a lot of money to be able to have that luxury to say, I don't really care, whereas most working musicians can't really say that. But nonetheless, it's a really important statement, I think, in part because what it suggests is that we've had certain kinds of shifts that have been determined by technology before in the past. So let's say the rise of LPs or cassettes or CDs, 8-tracks, whatever you may want to bring in there as a format, the rise of radio itself or television and its impact on music when it launched in the 1950s. But I think what he's saying is that this is a much more impactful shift, right? And that it's not just a kind of pivot, but it's actually the end of a particular era, which is not to say that people won't be making recorded music anymore. It's just to say that the nature of how we think about recorded music and recorded popular music is to some degree obsolete. And again, you may disagree with that. I disagree with it in certain kinds of ways. But this is not just one business model replacing another with the rise of the internet. The internet and social media have so drastically changed the way that we consume popular music, produce popular music, and get recommended popular music that we are now at a point where we really have to think about where we are heading into the future. And again, that's what I'm trying to do with the program that we have here for NYU. But we need new models, new ideas, new ways of thinking about recorded music, how it gets made, distributed, performed, and recommended. And it's not to say Adele is going to be out of a job or Beyonce is going to be out of a job. It's just to say that there are new models that are appearing before us that are nascent and that are sometimes hard to identify in a very tangible way. And it's up to us to figure out what these new models are and to be able to think through them. So to me, robotics is one such field that I think can have a major impact on music going forward as we go forward, and immersive experiences as they relate to technological developments around virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality are another. But first, let me deal with robotics. So everyone knows robotics are a rapidly advancing field. Nothing new about robotics, but clearly the advancements have been extreme in the last few years. We are all anticipating the robot revolution, right, where we will all lose our jobs. Robots will colonize us, take over the earth, because we've all seen that movie, because there's so many movies like that. But if the movies weren't enough, then we also have some of the major CEOs and technology entrepreneurs of our time also saying the same thing. So here's Elon Musk next to the Terminator, I believe, saying that he's worried about a robot apocalypse, which is a very alarmist title. But the point being, what happens when robots become smarter than we are, or if that happens. And many people in the highest levels of technology think it's a possibility. And again, we've seen this movie and we've seen how it plays out and we know how the narrative ends. But it doesn't end well for humans, let's put it that way. But still, these are very early kind of like nascent fears that I don't think are necessarily the way that we have to prioritize how we think about robotics and their impact on culture and also art. And here's Stephen Hawking as well, saying that artificial intelligence could evolve faster than the human race. There's a rogue robot rebellion coming around the corner, which again, a little too early for these pronouncements, but caution and skepticism is not a bad thing, I think, when it deals with the level of technological development that we're talking about. There's been a lot of writing on the field and the emergence of the robotics industry. Bill Gates in 2007 said that he felt that the robotics industry was developing in much the same way that the computer business did 30 years ago. And so this was in 2007 he said this, so we're talking about in the late 80s. So this is quite important, right? If the CEO of one of the major computer companies of our time is saying, hey, I've seen this before, I know what's going to happen, and you should be thinking about this as well. That's something relatively important, I think, to think about. And of course, we've seen images like this as well. Skip. This is Obama.
Good day, Mr.
On a trip to Japan.
And greetings from the International Space Station.
Let me just skip a little forward here if I can.
Screechy returns to Earth.
Okay. So this is Obama with a service robot in Japan.
Welcome to Nilaikan. Mr. President, I'm Arsenal, a humanoid robot. Here I go. I can kick.
It's going to be pretty hard, huh? If it hits me in the nose, it'll be
I
terrible.
can kick you country.
Okay, come on, I'm ready. Right here?
Here I go.
Hey, good job.
Okay, let's leave it. So I'm assuming most people have seen these kinds of service robots, which this is not science fiction. This is actual real life. These exist. Countries like Japan, they're a little bit more prevalent than they are in other countries like the United States, but nonetheless they exist and they're part of our contemporary present. There have been so many debates, of course, ethically around the rise of robots and not just the rise of robots, but the way that they are planning, or companies are planning to integrate them into our everyday lives as part of their business strategy. Ethical challenges like thinking about labor, job displacement, what happens when robots can do the jobs that humans can do, issues of privacy that we'll get to in a second, intellectual property issues, internet addiction issues, what happens if we fall in love with our robots? We've seen that movie too, which is Spike Jonze' Her, on and on and on. First, it might help if we define what a robot is. So it's a term that's been around since the 1920s. A robot, in the dictionary, is defined as a mechanical device that sometimes resembles a human, but it does not have to resemble a human, and can carry out a variety of complex human tasks. So it can do some of the things that humans can do, but the difference there is they have to be complex tasks rather than just unsophisticated tasks. And they can do so on command or by being programmed in advance. So a key aspect of what a robot is autonomy, right? That they can do certain things on their own behalf, either through programming or just autonomously, that they can act on their environment, that they can carry out tasks. And this is important because people often get confused when you talk about robots, because everything is a robot. This microphone is a robot. No, this is a piece of technology that can help me be amplified in a room, but it's not actually a robot. Your toaster is not necessarily a robot. It can make your bread brown, but it can't actually enable you to do the kinds of things in life that robots can. And the big debate, especially as it relates to music, is whether bots themselves, right? So algorithms, chat bots, all of those kinds of things that fall under the banner of bots can actually count as robots, or whether robots need to be manifested in a kind of physical form that could resemble a human being. But for the purposes of this lecture and for my own thinking about it, I think of bots and robots as being part of the same universe, and also really important to think about in terms of music, what's happening. So there was a poll that was taken where a number of people had to decide what constitutes a robot and what doesn't. 94% of people agreed that cell phones are not robots. Thank you. But Siri might be, might have aspects of what a robot can do on your cell phone. 79% of people agree that washing machines are not robots. Okay, so again, it's a little bit humorous, but at the same time, it's really important to identify exactly what the distinction is, so that we don't go around just thinking that everything is a robot simply because it enables some kind of human interaction with the environment. Of course, robotics is also, or aspects of robotics are referred to as deep learning, machine learning, which is what we'll talk about here, artificial intelligence, which is a term that is controversial and a lot of people don't like to use necessarily. As I mentioned before, one of the big debates around robots at this point is the potential impact on the labor force at a time all around the world when the middle class is disappearing and when there's an increasing gap between upper classes and poor and working classes. People are extremely nervous about the potential impact of robots to squeeze out the working class and poor class out of jobs that are considered DDD. So that basically means dull jobs, dirty jobs, and dangerous jobs, right? Many people will be arguing that those are the jobs that robots can easily do, and those are the jobs that humans either don't want to do or are often relegated to working class or poor individuals. And so this presents a huge and major problem ethically and in terms of labor and so on. George Beakey, who's written a great article called Current Trends in Robotics in the book Robot Ethics, says that we should also think of robots, quote, more simply and broadly as human replacements, more than mere tools, which cannot think and act independently. That's why a toaster is not a robot. Robots are able to serve in many old and new roles in society that are often handicapped and made impossible by human frailties and limitations. That is, semi and fully autonomous machines could carry out those jobs more optimally. Beyond the usual 3Ds, dull, dirty, dangerous jobs, robots can perform delicate and difficult surgeries, which are risky with shaky human hands. They can navigate inaccessible places, such as the ocean floor or the surface of Mars. They can, as the embodiment of artificial intelligence, they are more suited for jobs that demand information processing and action too quick for a human, such as in the US Navy's Phalanx, that detects, identifies, and shoots down enemy missiles rapidly closing in on a ship. So of course the use of robots for war and for battle is another area of concern. But labor and services, military and security, research and education, entertainment, and medical and healthcare are some of the major areas that robots, and personal care of course, that robots can have the most impact, I think, into the future. Okay, so as I discuss this and I say into the future, we're really talking about the present, right? Because as I just showed, robots are here. They're part of everyday life. The technology is improving drastically. Google is one of the major players, as most people I'm sure would know, behind some of these developments in robotics. If you haven't seen the Atlas robot via Boston Dynamics, you should, which is here. Let's see. We can pull up. So these are also humanoid, sort of. You can walk, you can push open doors, you can walk in snow, over hilly terrain. I would be very scared if I saw this walking towards me. I don't know how you feel. Just saying. Skip ahead a little bit there. Right, so it's easily can be seen how kind of low-wage labor, right, could easily be replaced by a machine that can do similar tasks for no money. It's quite agile. So these are often called agile robots. Humans are very mean. So it's thinking, it's learning. And then I think there's an image of it being pushed to the ground. So he's just thrown it to the ground. Oops. Right. So it's recalcitrant. It can get up on its own, right? So it's quite advanced. Just skip past this one. So besides some of those kinds of developments in agile robots like the one you just saw that can actually perform human tasks, of course the rise of self-driving cars is something that everybody should be familiar with at this point. So I won't belabor that, but this is also an aspect of what we're talking about when we talk about the development of robotics. I'm particularly interested in self-driving cars because of the long history of music and cars and the relationship. The entire history of popular music is really about the relationship of music and cars, right? Radios and cars in the 1940s that led to the development of rock and roll and on and on and on, and hip hop and Jeeps, and you can just keep going. And I think we're now at another turning point, right, where as self-driving cars start to become integrated into everyday life, potentially, because there are a lot of legal hurdles and so on, but the companies that are doing it have enough muscle that I think they're able to push past some of the legal concerns or are able to negotiate them in some cities. But one of the things that we have to think about with the rise of self-driving cars, I don't know if I have a slide for it here, I don't. But one of the things we have to think about is in the future of self-driving cars, the idea is that you won't necessarily own a car, right? So ownership, just as ownership has been marginalized in recorded music, where in the era of streaming services, you're not expected to necessarily own CDs, although some people still do. In some countries, like Japan, for instance, ownership is still a big important aspect of the music experience. But just as you're not expected to own CDs, you won't be expected to own cars. You'll be expected to go into a Google car or an Apple car. And then once you're in your Google car, the question is, and you're not driving, right? And it takes 45 minutes for you to get to work, you all of a sudden have time. And the question now, and I think the question going forward, will be to fight for the nature of the in-cabin entertainment experience. So when you're in a car for 45 minutes and it's Google, Google wants Google Play, where they want you to be tapped into your music, and they want you to be able to have your customized recommendations. Same thing with Apple and Apple Music. So all of a sudden, the in-car curation becomes incredibly important for companies to vie over. And we're not there yet, but I do believe we will be there very, very soon, okay? Smart homes, of course, another area that we need to think about in terms of ambient intelligence and the rise of automated systems. So the idea that, again, this is not speculative. This is actually happening now. Companies like Nest, Tony Fadell's company, that provide smart systems in your home, like a smart thermometer and those kinds of things. But the idea that your home would be part of the Internet of Things, right, where all the devices in your home would be connected to data, that they would know who you are, what you're all about, what your behavior is. The lights turn on before you come into the room because they know what time you like to come into the room. They know what setting you like for the lights. But also, of course, in terms of music, that you will have a personalized and customized experience in your own home. And so increasingly, companies are going to be vying for who controls the smart home experience in terms of music. And there are already companies that are clearly ahead of other companies because they've already been doing some of this kind of early work. So Sonos is one of them. And again, we've seen some of this in movies. So a clip from her, the Spike Jonze film, where Joaquin Phoenix, character in the future, where he falls in love with his operating system, which is not that far-fetched, I think, even at this point, goes into his home, and it's a kind of vision of a smart home where the lights turn on automatically for him. I am the makeup on your eyes. And he puts his stuff down, and then all of a sudden he's playing an augmented reality video game in the middle of his living room with just his hands and no actual controls. So we'll get to that in a second. Okay. Also live-in recommendation systems that are in homes already. So again, this is not futuristic. This is current and present.
Ask you questions. So if you were to say,
so the Amazon
Alexa,
Echo.
What's 42 divided by 7?
42 divided by 7 is 6.
That's handy. Alexa, what's a prime number?
Prime number, a positive integer, the only positive divisors of which are one in the number itself.
Okay. So having an actual device in your home that knows you better than you know yourself, ideally, that would be the goal, that can curate and recommend to you songs, music, films, tell you about travel opportunities. This is all, again, sort of part of the future. Here's the commercial for Amazon Echo, which is a little scary, but I'll play it anyway. Wait. How do I get to that?
When it first arrived from Amazon, I didn't know what it was. What is it?
You'll see.
Is it for me?
It's for everyone. It's called Amazon Echo.
How's it going?
I'm just finishing up right now.
Is it on?
Oh, it's always on.
Can it hear me right now?
Nope. It only hears you when you use the wake word we chose. Alexa.
Well, what does it do?
Alexa, what do you do?
I can play music, answer questions, get the news and weather, create to-do lists, and much more.
Awesome. Alexa, play rock music.
Rock music.
Alexa, stop.
Wait, I want to try.
Okay, so that's a very basic kind of idea, right, of music in your smart home, but this is part of the future, right? Thinking about domestic space, thinking about how music operates in domestic space, and who can provide the best recommendation and curation system within a smart home. So I think Tony Fadell and their company, they're not working on this, but this is something that companies who partner with Nest would be, I think, in a good position to work on. Again, this stuff is not new. This is part of popular culture, history, and lore. So things like the Jetsons from the 1950s.
Joe had already-
Oops, let me just jump. With the smart home, right? The concept of the smart home from cartoons in the 50s was a big thing. And again, you have things like Sonos, wireless home. Ethercone is a new relatively new technology. It hasn't really taken off the way that it should. Sorry if anyone here works for Ethercone. But I'll show you.
Ordinary sound systems just play music. This speaker listens to me. Play Rihanna.
Please don't stop the music.
Other times, it chooses what music to play from the internet based on what it thinks might fit my taste or mood.
All right, so you obviously have to input a lot of data, right, for the algorithm to understand what you like and who you are. And this, of course, leads to all kinds of other sort of dangers, especially around issues of privacy. So many of you will remember the controversy around Samsung televisions, which have microphones and sensors in them so they can hear what's going on in the living room, like the Alexa, Amazon Echo does, like Ethercone. They have to be listening all the time, processing the data from your conversations in order to serve you better, to curate experiences to you. And so, of course, you know, this was a big issue with Samsung. I won't go into it now, but the fact that the TVs were actually taking in all of this data and then potentially selling it to third parties or working with third parties and so on. All kinds of other uses for robots, not going to go into them here, but nanorobots, lots of amazing possibilities for battling all kinds of diseases and of kind of frailties with the human body and so on. Let's skip past this. Okay, so if we can consider bots as robots, everybody in the room, probably everybody out there has made use of artificial intelligence. If you've ever received a recommendation for a service like Pandora, Spotify, Netflix, you've asked Siri for directions, we should think more about streaming services as virtual agents. We don't talk about them that way, but that's actually what they are. They're designed to make our lives more efficient, more pleasurable through recommendations, and most of us already use algorithms on a daily basis, especially around music, to listen to our music if we're listening to Tidal or Spotify or Pandora or anything else. But we don't often think of it that way. And I think we should, because I think some of these music streaming services are helping acculturate our societies to the coming robot revolution, right? They're helping us become very used to the idea of having agents all around us that tell us what to listen to or help us know what to listen to, that know us really well. Then we also have to think about algorithms in music itself beyond just streaming services, the way that algorithms have actually helped humans write music in software like Ludwig, Vocaloid, Aftec Digiband, Microsoft Songsmith, and more. There's also algorithms, of course, that can create music, so algorithms that can write, produce, and recommend songs. Here's a really interesting article from Gigamom. Robots versus pop stars. Who's better at curating your pop music, right? So again, they're mistaking robots and bots. They're conflating the two, but still, it's an interesting question, right? What if robots become much better at human beings at curating your musical experience for you? And there is this debate going on now, and I'm sure we could have it in this room too. Would you prefer human curators who put together playlists based on your preferences, or would you prefer robots that can aggregate data, link data from a variety of different users, and also they know a great deal about you from your the information that you've opted in and inputted to be able to recommend to you in a much more effective way? I think a lot of people are erring on the side these days of the robots or the bots doing it, which is interesting, especially for me as a human curator. So these are things that we all have to be thinking about. And The Atlantic also had an article recently called When Robots Write Songs, looking at the idea that it's not just humans who can create original music, right? That robots can do it too through technologically developed algorithms or the developing algorithms and so on. So one thing we can think about is generative music. This is the whole concept of music that can create itself through algorithmic improvisation. So some of the work that Brian Eno is doing, for instance, with apps, generative music apps. There's also JukeDeck, which is a UK-based startup that does generative soundtracks for videos. So basically, you can hit create track, and you can create your own soundtrack for a video. You just pick the mood. I think it says up there, right? Let's make a piano track that feels uplifting and is 1 minute and 30 seconds long. So this is kind of where we're at with music. It may be just writing jingles, but this is, part of where the present and future could be heading in some ways. And they, of course, they make you pay for it. Deep Beat is another site that allows, basically an algorithm writes raps, right? Rhymes for rappers. So if you want to come up with rhymes and you feel lazy or you can't do it yourself or you just don't know how to do it, Deep Beat will do it for you. There's also Liquid Notes, which is a songwriting assistant driven by these intelligent music algorithms, right? That can actually help you write songs or become a better songwriter. So we live among a range of all of these kind of interactive multimodal systems, these kind of human-machine hybrids and interfaces and so on. But what of machines that can actually make music with no or very little real-time human interaction? So maybe they involve programming, but at the end of the day, they seem to be autonomous in certain kinds of ways. So autonomous musical instruments, robotic instruments that generate sound acoustically, sometimes through actuators or through other tools. Someone who's doing this work, I think, in a really brilliant way is right here in Dresden, in Germany, Moritz Simon Geist, some of you may know, who has the company Sonic Robots. One of his projects was a robot installation called the MR808, which was a replica of the 1980s drum machine, the TR-808. In this case, instead of humans playing the drum sounds, robots would play the drum sounds, and it was actually a life-size, like bigger than life-size replica of the 808. So it looks something like this. Let's just play here. So it's a mechanical relay controlled by Arduino for the bass sound. The robot's doing all the drums. Everything's programmed in Ableton. One of the things we also have to think about is, are there things that robots can do that humans can't do, right? So to have a robot that can have 78 fingers, right, and can play a guitar in a way that even the most skilled human guitarists can't play, that exists currently. To have, obviously in dance music and house music, the hi-hat becomes incredibly important. So if you can have a robot that can play a hi-hat 100 times faster than a human can, you can all of a sudden maybe have a new genre of music or have BPMs that are at an unreal rate that a human would never be able to play live, but a robot could actually do that. So those are some of the things that we also have to think about. Whether a robot at this stage can actually play music that we want to buy in the way that we want to buy an Adele album, I don't think we're there, right? But it doesn't mean to say that we won't get there. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. I don't think anybody has the exact answer to that yet. There are also, of course, drones that perform music. So the idea of drone rock, the idea of robot drones that can actually create their own band. So as an example, some of you have probably seen these videos. So this is KML Robotics out of Philadelphia, programming a 6th aircraft ensemble to hover over instruments and strum or strike them without any human interaction whatsoever, other than the initial press play. So it's all pre-programmed. It's very strange. Another example you've probably seen as well. Let me skip a little bit into it. Okay, so the question is, would anybody in this room actually pay to go see that? I think some people would probably say, no way. Some people would be like, sure, it's a great spectacle, right? I mean, maybe we'll get used to it eventually, but right now it's completely eerie, I think, to see music being made with zero human interaction. Again, it's not the first time in history this has happened. There's a history to that too. But with drones, it adds a whole other level to it. And of course, you see articles like this one from The Verge, band of drones can play music better than your average human, which actually might be true. And there are, of course, so many tech students and entrepreneurs and people who work at companies developing all kinds of ways in which instruments can improvise, right? And you can create bands and so on. So I'll skip some of that stuff now. But just to say, if I can skip to it here, will we pay money to go and see robots perform music? Well, we already are doing this. I don't think I have a clip of it here. Oops. So My Robot Lady was an opera, right, that was here in Berlin. I don't know if, did anybody see it? No one actually saw it? Okay. So it was a small robot the size of an 8-year-old child, the star of My Square Lady. So it was a new opera at the Comiche Opera, and basically My Fair Lady, but instead of Eliza Doolittle, a robot in the lead role that was programmed. And people saw it. And of course, Miku, that many people will know, one of the most successful artists right now coming out of Asia, who is basically, created through holographic technology. It's not really holographic, it's just Pepper's ghost, just no illusion. But nonetheless, people are paying big ticket prices to go and see Miku perform. I mean, look at the audience. And this is all over the world. Right? So if people are willing to pay for that, what's to say they won't be willing to pay for robots performing autonomously, right? So all of this stuff has to lead us to think about issues of feeling and emotions and sentience for robots. It takes us into all these transhumanism debates, Donna Haraway, some of her classic 80s debates around cyborgs and so on, Ray Kurzweil, the age of spiritual machines, all of his ideas about the singularity, which have yet to come, that moment when machines start to think for themselves and merge with human beings. It's just a reminder that some of the major innovators working in the music space have long been at the forefront of pioneering questions about robot intelligence. These are not separate worlds. Kurzweil is a perfect example of somebody who's been doing that thinking. You could also look at somebody like Roger Troutman from Roger and Zapp, right, who's sort of like a kind of musical philosopher around the relationship of man and machine. Anybody who's worked with a vocoder, T-Pain, on and on and on, right? We have been acculturated to thinking about the relationship between music and machines for most of the 20th century, and we are certainly being primed now to think about the future of this stuff as it relates to the rise of robots. I'm going to skip through some history stuff here, but there have been musical robots for 1,000 years. Obviously, we have to think about the metaphors of robotics in film and music that have gotten us to this point where when you watch the Google robot, if you have these kind of fears like, oh, wow, we're going to all die, some of that stuff is because we've seen so many movies about it, or we've listened to music that references robots. So, of course, Metropolis, which is very fitting here in this context, Fritz Lang, Blade Runner, Steven Spielberg's AI. I'm just giving 3 examples, but there's 100 more. And then also, of course, the enduring image of robots in pop music itself, or humans who want to become machines. So Kraftwerk, of course, Devo. I'm going to skip through some of this stuff because everybody's heard it. Gary Newman, Ramil Z, Daft Punk, Janelle Monáe, I think, which is interesting, seeing her reference the Metropolis image of the woman machine. It's super fascinating. Square Pusher has done some interesting stuff. Remember I mentioned the 78-finger guitarist? Well, that actually really exists. Square Pusher's project with Z Machines with an entire robot band. Skip some of it here. Again, no humans on stage. Let me see if I can get to the guitarist. So 12 picks, 78 fingers. And again, I don't know if that's music that you necessarily want to listen to outside of the context of seeing a concert like this, but nonetheless it exists and it's happening and it's in the real world. Of course, with the rise of 3D printing, we'll soon be able to do some of this stuff on our own. So with MakeBlock, you can make your own music robot. Quick little sample of that. You can program it. You can put it together yourself. Some programming. Use your phone. Okay, I'll just skip past that. So this is leading people to write articles like, musicians, the robots are coming for your jobs. So it's not just an issue of labor for low-paying jobs, quote-unquote non-skilled jobs. This is now something that musicians have to really think about, or it will become something that musicians will likely have to think about depending on how this technology develops. Also fears, will all musicians become robots? No, they won't, but it's a interesting question to pose. And there we have a robot playing a trumpet. Okay, just really quickly going to switch gears. I'm not going to talk too much about VR and AR because I want to take some time for questions. But I'm just going to jump out of this and go into the next PowerPoint here. So let me save. That could take a while to save. I don't know how many of you have seen Dawn Richards' live 360 concert. She did the first ever YouTube live 360 performance using 360 cameras. Looks something like this, a bit higher definition. So basically the idea was to take you into the Dawn Richard performance. Dawn Richard, R&B pop indie sensation. So here you are at her concert, on stage, if you want to be on stage. You can look at the ceiling, if you want to look at the ceiling, you're bored. Right, so to be able to stream a concert live for VR, that's 360, is still a relatively new concept. It's just premiered about 6 months ago. When she comes on here. If you can't live with me. Right, so being able to choose your perspective and so on. I can't make you stay. Okay, so I start with that because I think it's kind of interesting in terms of where VR and AR and mixed reality could be heading. Again, I'm not going to overdo this, but what we're talking about here is, to me, these are all immersive technologies. That's the most important thing to know and I think to characterize them as. So basically immersive reality, Janet Murray defined as the pleasurable experience of being transported to an elaborately simulated place which results from the sensation of being surrounded by a completely other reality as different from water is from air, that takes over all of our attention, our whole perceptual apparatus. Let me just jump past this. Oliver Grau has done some really great work in his book, Virtual Art, I think is the best book on VR that's ever been done. And he talks about virtual reality being about the loss of frame, right? So the idea that there's no frame, like a proscenium in a theater, that distinguishes the art from who you are and where you are, but everything is part of the same whole, that there's a fusion of image and observer. The person watching and the actual image itself, and that virtual reality tries to flood or overwhelm the senses. But if you take this a step further, what we're talking about here is the desire for audiences to be inside of the art, right? And especially in the context of music. So what does it mean to be inside of a song, to be inside of an app, to be inside of a film, to be inside of the record or the album itself, to fuse the product and the observer into a seamless whole. That's at least the goal. And obviously this is huge, big business with Sony, Oculus Rift, and Sony Project Morpheus, Oculus Rift, HTC. So many people have invested in VR. My personal take on it, and I've just written an article for Vice about this, that there's way too much attention to VR. And I think VR, while it's a promising technology, it's a very aggressive one and we're talking about the headsets here, the HMDs, the head-mounted displays. It's a very aggressive technology that cuts off all of your existing senses, or many of your existing senses, visual in particular, in order to provide you with this heightened immersive experience. And I don't know how many people have gone to like a VR festival of films. Anybody in the room? VR. So when you see a VR festival, you'll see people with the head-mounted displays plus headphones on, and everyone's like doing this and looking all around, and it's like 100 people in a room doing that. So it's a very strange, almost antisocial technology. It's only social because a lot of people are doing the same thing, but it's not social in that it doesn't get people to engage with each other. And people said the same thing about the rise of film, that people were sitting in an audience, everybody staring at the screen, and they weren't engaging with each other. So there's some argument to be made about, diminishing returns of socializing in these big scale events. But I think AR, which is augmented reality, right, where these virtual images are projected into the real world. So some of the work that Magic Leap is doing, for instance, to project these kind of virtual images into space. So we would all be looking at a pink elephant right here in the middle of the room that would be projected, or that we would be using some kind of, again, head-mounted display like Google Glass, which did not work, but some kind of technology that would allow us all to be able to see this pink elephant and interact with it. I think there's a lot more promise with AR than VR personally, because it's so social in that it allows people to really engage with the real world in a very tangible way. And we saw this with the rise of Pokemon Go, right? Where, I think it took people by surprise how popular it was and how it allowed people to engage with the social world. It also allowed people to jump off of cliffs because they weren't watching where they were going and those kinds of things. But it was a very, very powerful technology. And I think it says a lot about where AR is heading and where VR is heading. And certainly mixed reality, which is a mixture of VR and AR, is also quite promising. So just skipping past some other stuff here. Long history to virtual reality, certainly nothing new about it. 3D is very old, 4D, super old. It's been around all of the 20th century, basically, for the most part, and then had a big resurgence in the 1950s, the idea of three-dimensional cinema. But I think we should learn from 3D, particularly in the 50s, because it was presented to us largely as a novelty. And if I can just jump to some lovely slides here. So there's some history, jumping through some history stuff that we're not talking about. Looks all crazy. The Sensorama, where you'd get into this booth and all your senses would be overwhelmed, smell, sound, everything. These booths that never worked. The revolutionary motion picture system that takes you into another world with 3D, wide vision, motion, color, stereo sound. But we have this now with 4D, 6D cinema, right? The Jurassic World, theme park rides and those kinds of things are doing some similar stuff. Head-mounted displays, just jumping past all of this. IMAX, jump past all that. So these are some of those 3D images, right? A lion in your lap, a lover in your arms, right? This is what these movies in the 50s were promising you, that it would so revolutionize and transform the viewing experience that you would literally feel the lion, right? It was coming at you. Here's a trailer, early 3D trailer. They can jump. You will go into the third dimension if you watch a 3D movie, literally. They don't even show you any images from the movie, right? It's just... So music's a little scary too. And then, the ads themselves, right? Nothing that has gone before can compare with this. Right at you. It's coming right at you, right? Another one here comes off the screen right at you. So this stuff the advertising was about hype, right? It was over advertised. There were a lot of artistic uses of 3D in the 50s, Hitchcock, other directors, so a lot of really beautiful use of 3D, but the advertising really overwhelmed the experience itself in a lot of ways. Here's one for a movie called The Angry Red Planet. See the strange mile-high city of Mars, see the gigantic bat, rat, spider. But of course the effects are terrible, it doesn't look anything like it. Here's an example, really quickly.
On Mars, for centuries we have wondered. Now, for the first time, through the new photographic miracle of cinemagic, you will see the wonders of this strange and terrifying world when you see the Angry Red Planet. Join this daring crew, the first in the scientific race between nations to attempt to land on Mars.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
Blast off from Earth with courageous astronauts Gerald Moore, Nora Hayden, Les Tremaine, Jack Kruschen. Travel thousands of miles through space to the unknown. Cinemagic is not being shown to you now, but this wild land comes alive in Cinemagic. You'll see buildings miles high in Cinemagic. Journey to the center of sudden terror in Cinemagic. Be trapped by the tentacles of man-devouring plants in Cinemagic. Feel the fire-hot breath of a 40-foot monster as it reaches for you in Cinemagic.
That's the bat rat. Okay. Anyway, so I say all that, just to read through that. I say all that because I think this is very similar to the way that VR is being marketed right now. It's obviously much more extreme, but it's being marketed as such a revolutionary technology. It's going to change the face of who we are and how we are. And I think at the end of the day, some of the graphics are still in their infancy. It's not quite the technology that it promises to be. And it could develop, but I think it may be oversold in some kind of ways. I think we can learn from the example of these virtual technologies from the 1950s, earlier even, and hopefully kind of make a better future. And that said, where we are today in terms of music, right, is the development of all these apps that allow you to go into the world of the music. So Bjork's Biophilia, even her video for Stone Milker, looking at the Wilderness Downtown, Arcade Fire, Beck's Sound and Vision 360 Interactive, Usher and Nas did a police brutality interactive video, Radiohead's and Universal Everything, the Polyphona project, none of which I'm going to show now. All of these things I think are really, really interesting and are part of the future of popular music, which is to say how it engages with immersive technology. But the real future to me is immersive technology as it relates also to artificial intelligence. So the world of robotics and artificial intelligence merges with immersive technology. That can become incredibly fascinating. So think about AR, right? So that if we were to see a digitally projected pink elephant in the room, but if our technologies that we're using to see that pink elephant also knew where we are in space and time, had our GPS location, could recommend things to us, could put us in touch with other people, help us socialize, right? It's all about that recommendation, curation, your devices knowing who you are. So tying that together with the question of immersive technology or the promise of immersive technology, I think is part of a very promising future for music. Okay, let me leave it there and take 10 minutes for questions if I can. You may clap if you like, but you're more than welcome not to as well. All right. Thank you. I'm supposed to give you a microphone, which is here. One second.
test. Yeah. So, what do you think about like bots or algorithms doing the jobs of like the recording industry? Like I know this app Blender that masters stuff. Do you think it will be possible to do this also for maybe mixing? I don't think so, but maybe you know more. Is there something being developed like a mixed bot?
I mean, I think I don't know about mixing per se. Somebody else in the room might know more if there's actually bots that can do professional mixing, but I can certainly see it being part of the future, and maybe not, you know, again, it's the question of the human touch. So do you want Tony Maserati to do your mix? Or do you want, you know, do you want Chris Lord-Alge? Do you want people on that level, Grammy-winning, you know, mixers to be able to provide their human touch? Or do you want a machine that can do it, maybe not at the same level or with the same kind of quality, but can do it cheaper, faster? I think these are the questions that we're going to have to face in almost every aspect of music, and including mixing, I would say.
So you would say it's not really possible to have that human touch through the algorithm because it could be like intelligent and.
Yeah, I'm not. I think the machines are not that smart right now, but they're going to become much smarter. Okay. And this is what all these fears of the revolution are, and so on. Yeah. But clearly, we will keep building them and developing them until they are smart enough to do work that is indistinguishable from a human, or sometimes even better. I think creative people can still be satisfied or comfortable with the fact that there are certain things that machines can't necessarily do, you know, with the same kind of level of creativity as humans at this point. And so, you know, it's good to be in a creative position and maybe not in a kind of a job where, you know, it's picking up a box and putting it on a shelf, because your job will certainly be replaced by a robot in the next 10 years, if not already. And that's something that we all have to be very concerned about and worried about, because it means massive unemployment for our society and destabilizing the labor industries globally. And I think it's going to happen in music too. Music always gets hit hard, right, when there are changes and shifts in labor. So when you think about the 1950s and so on, think about the changes in the production and the making of music, right, and the rise of, even in the 60s, let's say, of the self-contained auteur, the person who could make the music themselves, could write it themselves, could sing it themselves, could perform it themselves, could produce it themselves, the Brian Wilsons, the Todd Rundgrens. And that was alarming to the music industry, because it destabilized the clear separation of labor, where in the Brill Building era, for instance, you know, you had songwriters, and then there were separate performers, and then there were people who did the mixing. So you're going to start to see a real kind of destabilizing, I think, of those positions increasingly as we go along.
So you spoke briefly about human emotion, like just mentioned it in passing, and I was wondering if you think that at some point robots will be able to, I mean, I don't think that they will, but get on the level where algorithms can, or some sort of technology is able to mirror emotions, because I think what connects to people right now in music, or what definitely connects with me in music, is the emotional experience that it puts me through, and probably other listeners as well. So if you left all of music making and marketing and everything up to robots, do you think they will ever really understand human emotion to the capacity that all of our jobs could be taken over? Because
well, there's a big question as to whether there's actually any emotion right now at record labels and in the music industry, so we can start with that. There's also this long history, right, of the relationship of machines and human beings in music. So we've been negotiating this for 80, 90 years or more already, and especially in the last 50 or 60 years, that relationship has been heavily cultivated. And again, there are questions whether, you know, contemporary pop music is just sort of formula itself, and whether the emotional experience is something we graft or project onto a lot of music, as opposed to being sort of inherent to songs themselves and those sorts of things. But I think if you've seen the movie Her, Spike Jonze, right, it's fiction, but it's very close to the near future, in the sense that I could easily see in iOS being developed that's much smarter than Siri. I don't think Siri is that smart. I don't think Siri learns very well. Siri refuses to know the name of my friends. It just can't. It just doesn't seem to learn the way I thought it would when it launched, when it was called a do engine rather than a search engine, and it was promising to become smarter and smarter. I'm not sure if it's at that level yet, but it is obviously developing and it's improving. And I can imagine more intelligent assistants. And eventually, I would argue that for a lot of people, the goal is to be able to open your computer and for your computer to really know you better than you know yourself. And we say that sort of in jest, but that is the goal, right? For your computer to be able to say, hey, Jason, how you doing today? By the way, you were looking for flights to Argentina last week, and I saw that one went on sale, and your friend bought one too, so do you want me to book a trip with your friend? Like, that's the goal, right? To have a computer that is so, for some people, that's the goal, is to have a computer that has so much facility, that knows you so well, that is so connected to your everyday thinking and your behavior, how you operate psychologically, your dreams, your ideas, your ambitions, that it can actually serve you in a way that almost no human being can serve you. And if you do get to that point, then the question that you have to think about is the question that Spike Jonze is asking, which is, if your computer knows you better than you know yourself, isn't your computer your soulmate? And don't you want to fall in love with your soulmate? So the emotion question is a really interesting one, because again, we're not there yet. We can certainly imagine that we could have the technology where our machines can mimic our emotions so to such a great degree that we can't tell the difference. And human beings are very good at faking emotions too, right? So who's to say that robots shouldn't just become better at human beings than faking emotions? Big questions. I mean, I don't have all the answers, but I'm talking through stuff.
Not so much to do with robots, but to do with the technology and the jobs. I've heard a lot of producers and sound engineers say they're completely redundant in the industry now because people can just download Logic on their computer and do everything themselves. How much do you agree with that?
Well, I think that's extreme, because producers are clearly highly valuable, highly needed. They certainly help mediate an artist's experience, or if they're the artist themselves, they are often responsible for the total realization of the sound of that artist or the vision of that artist. They work with an artist psychologically in ways that a machine necessarily can't, to get the best out of an artist. And sometimes that means just sitting in a room and doing nothing, and the artist gets mad, and that madness gets on the record, and that's what you wanted to capture in the first place. So there's all kinds of ways in which producers, I think, are extremely valuable.
Because I was having this argument with a producer at Abbey Road, actually, and I was having this argument because I hate like programming violins and programming guitars, and a lot of people do that. And I was saying, like, what's the point? Like, when they're real instruments, and they're saying like a lot of people are saying musicians just like not needed anymore because you can do your own violin, you can do your own guitar.
Yeah.
And I was saying, how do you program emotion though? You can't do emotion with that, and they were saying like, you can.
It still needs human input, right? So this has been a question that's been going on forever, not forever, but for a long time, with the rise of synthesizers and machines that could emulate actual instruments and do it well or not well. And sometimes people like the not well sounding instruments, but it still needs human input. I think what the bigger question is machines that don't require as much human input, or just require some advanced programming and then are able to actually improvise on their own. So to go see a robot band that can actually improvise once humans give it some basic commands, and then they can just create their own music for 2 hours. And then the question is, and this is the question that magazines like The Atlantic are asking, is that music, or could that music actually be better than the music some human beings can write? And it remains to be seen. Right now, I don't hear much. I've not heard music by a robot that's more interesting than the music by human beings, but I can imagine in 5 to 10, 15, 20 years, we might. And then we have to confront a lot of realities that are going to face us at that point.